My name is Noor, and I want to tell you about the day my whole life changed. I was 23 years old, living in a small city in Indonesia where almost everyone I knew followed Islam, just like my family had done for generations. I worked at a textile shop near the market, measuring fabric and helping customers choose patterns for their clothes. My days were simple and predictable, filled with prayers 5 times a day and quiet evenings at home with my mother and younger sister. One afternoon, a woman named Maria came into the shop. She was a regular customer, always kind and smiling, and she loved buying bright-colored fabrics for her sewing projects. That day, she seemed especially happy, her eyes sparkling as she told me she was getting married in 2 weeks. I congratulated her warmly, measuring out the blue silk she wanted for her wedding decorations. As she paid, she did something unexpected. She pulled out a small cream-colored card from her purse and handed it to me. It was a wedding invitation. I felt my stomach tighten as I looked at the card. The invitation was beautiful, with gold lettering and tiny flowers printed along the edges. But I hesitated because I knew Maria was a Christian. My family had always taught me to be respectful to people of other faiths, but also to keep a safe distance. The next 2 weeks were difficult. I kept the invitation hidden in my drawer beneath my scarves, taking it out sometimes at night to look at it. Part of me wanted to go because Maria had always been kind to me, treating me like a friend rather than just a shopkeeper. Finally, the wedding day arrived. It was a Saturday morning, and I told my mother I was going to visit my friend's city across town. The lie made my stomach hurt, but I felt pulled to go to this wedding for reasons I could not explain. I wore my nicest hijab, a deep green one with delicate embroidery, and a simple long dress. As I walked through the streets toward the church address written on the invitation, my hands were shaking. I must have stopped 3 or 4 times, almost turning back, but each time something pushed me forward. It was as if an invisible thread was pulling me gently toward that building. The church was smaller than I expected, with white walls and a simple wooden cross above the entrance. People were streaming in, dressed in their best clothes, laughing and greeting each other with warm embraces. I sat in that back row, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The room gradually grew quieter as the ceremony was about to begin. I glanced up and saw musicians gathering at the front near a small stage area. There was a man with a guitar, a woman sitting at a keyboard, and another person holding a tambourine. They began tuning their instruments, creating soft sounds that filled the waiting silence. I had never been to a Christian wedding before, so I had no idea what to expect. In my mind, I assumed it would be similar to the Muslim weddings I had attended, with formal readings and traditional songs. Then the music started, and it was nothing like what I had imagined. It was when the people began to sing that something unexpected happened inside me. Their voices rose together, not in the formal way of rehearsed performances, but in a way that felt personal and real. They sang in Indonesian, so I understood every word. The lyrics were about love and faithfulness, about someone who never leaves and never fails. I found myself listening more carefully than I intended to. The words spoke about a presence that brings peace, about arms that hold us when we are afraid, about a light that shines in darkness. As a Muslim, I believed in God, in Allah the merciful and compassionate. But these words described God in a way I had never heard before. Then something very strange began to happen to me. As the second song started, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. At first, I thought perhaps the room was too hot, that there were too many people crowded into this small space. But this warmth was different from physical heat. It felt like it was coming from inside me, spreading outward through my body like warm water flowing through my veins. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable with this sensation that I could not explain or control. The people continued singing, and the warmth continued growing. I gripped the edge of my seat, trying to steady myself. My breathing had become shallow and quick. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out immediately, to escape whatever was happening to me. But my legs would not move. It was as if I was meant to stay in that seat, meant to experience whatever this moment was bringing to me. The musicians played on, unaware of the battle happening inside one Muslim girl sitting alone in the back row. The sensation was so strong that I closed my eyes, thinking maybe if I could not see the church or the people or the cross at the front, These feelings would go away and I could return to normal. But closing my eyes made it worse. With my eyes shut, the presence I was feeling became even more real, even more impossible to ignore. Tears started forming in my eyes. I blinked rapidly, trying to force them back. I could not cry here, not in front of all these strangers, not in this Christian church. What would people think if they saw a Muslim girl weeping during a Christian wedding? I bit my lip hard, using the physical pain to try to control the emotions flooding through me. But the tears would not obey me. They spilled over and ran down my cheeks, then more came, then more, until I was crying steadily and quietly, trying desperately not to make any sound. I needed to leave. That thought became urgent in my mind. I had to get out of this building, away from this music, away from this overwhelming presence that I could not name or understand. I stood up slowly, carefully, trying not to draw attention to myself. My legs felt weak, as if I had been sitting for hours instead of just 20 minutes. I took one step toward the aisle, then another. The door was only a few meters away. If I could just reach it, I could escape into the familiar world outside where things made sense, where I knew who I was and what I believed. But as I stepped into the aisle, my body betrayed me completely. The tears that I had been trying to control broke free like a dam bursting. I was not just crying anymore. I was weeping, sobbing, with my whole body shaking from the force of it. The sounds came out of my mouth before I could stop them, gasping sobs that I could not contain no matter how hard I tried. Several people in the nearby rows turned to look at me, their faces showing concern and surprise. I wanted to run, but I could barely walk. I stumbled toward the door, my vision blurred by tears, my breath coming in ragged gasps. A woman near the door stood up quickly and came to me. She put her arm gently around my shoulders and guided me out into the small hallway outside the main room. I sat on that bench in the hallway for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. The woman asked softly if I was okay, if there was someone she could call for me. I shook my head, not trusting my voice yet. She told me her name was Ruth and that I could stay as long as I needed. Through the walls, I could hear the wedding ceremony continuing, the pastor's voice speaking words I could not make out, followed by more music and then applause. Maria was married now. I had missed the actual ceremony because of my breakdown. Part of me felt guilty about that, but a larger part of me was still trying to process what had just happened to me. When I finally felt steady enough to stand, Ruth walked me to the church entrance. My mind raced as I walked, trying to make sense of what had occurred. I had gone to a simple wedding, planning to sit quietly and observe. Instead, I had experienced something that shook the very foundation of everything I believed about God and faith and reality itself. That presence I had felt, that overwhelming love and warmth, what was it? Who was it? My Islamic teaching told me that Christians worshipped incorrectly, that they had strayed from the true path. But how could something wrong feel so right? How could something false feel so completely true and real? I thought about all the times I had prayed in the mosque, all the times I had performed my ablutions and bowed toward Mecca, all the times I had recited verses from the Quran. Those practices had given me structure and discipline. They had made me feel like I was doing what I was supposed to do. But I realized now that I had never felt what I felt in that church. I had never experienced that sense of being truly seen, truly known, truly loved without any conditions or requirements. In all my years of faithful religious practice, I had been trying to reach God through my own efforts, trying to be good enough to deserve His attention. But in that church, it felt like God had reached down to me. The walk home took nearly an hour. By the time I reached my street, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky, painting everything in golden light. I slowed my steps as I approached my house, not ready yet to face my mother and sister, not ready to pretend that everything was normal. I stopped at a small park near our home and sat on a swing that children use during the day. The metal chains creaked as I rocked gently back and forth, staring at the ground beneath my feet. What was I supposed to do now? I could not tell anyone in my family what had happened. They would think I had lost my mind or, worse, that I had betrayed our faith and our family. I could not go back to that church because I did not belong there. I was Muslim, born into a Muslim family, raised in a Muslim community. Everything about my identity was tied to Islam. But something had touched me in that church, something real and powerful and undeniable. I could not simply forget it or pretend it had not happened. The experience was burned into my memory, into my very soul. I finally went home as darkness was settling over the city. My mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and my sister was watching television in the living room. I greeted them both quietly and went straight to my bedroom, telling them I had a headache and needed to rest. It was not entirely a lie. My head did hurt from all the crying, and my whole body felt drained, like I had run a great distance. I lay on my bed in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The call to evening prayer drifted through my window from the nearby mosque, the familiar sound that had structured my days for as long as I could remember. Normally, I would get up immediately, perform my washing ritual, and pray. But tonight I stayed on my bed, listening to the call without moving. The days that followed were some of the strangest of my life. I went to work at the textile shop, measured fabric, helped customers, and smiled politely as I always did. I came home, ate dinner with my family, and went through all the motions of normal life. I tried to pray my regular Islamic prayers, but the words felt empty now, like speaking into a void. 3 weeks passed in this strange state of confusion and inner turmoil. I thought about Maria often, wondering if I should go back to the shop and try to talk to her about what had happened. But what would I say? How could I explain something I myself did not understand? I was afraid too that if I spoke about it out loud, it might sound crazy or foolish. Maybe I had just been emotional that day. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. You cannot trick yourself into feeling the kind of love and peace I had felt. You cannot imagine something that powerful and that real. It had happened to me, and no amount of logical reasoning could make it go away or reduce it to mere emotion. Something or someone had met me in that church, and I could not shake the growing belief that it was Jesus himself, the one the Christians prayed to, the one they called the Son of God. That thought terrified me. In Islam, we believed Jesus was a prophet, a good man, but certainly not God and certainly not someone to be worshipped. To even consider that he might be more than that felt like the ultimate betrayal of my faith and family. I was risking everything by even allowing these thoughts into my mind. If anyone knew what I was thinking, I could lose my family, my friends, my entire community. The consequences were too serious to ignore. One night, about a month after the wedding, I could not sleep. I lay in bed tossing and turning, my mind spinning with questions and fears and doubts. The house was completely silent. In that dark, quiet room, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. I could not continue living in this state of confusion and inner conflict. So I did something I had never done before. I spoke quietly into the darkness, directing my words to Jesus, testing to see if he was real, if he was truly who the Christians claimed he was. I told him that if he was real, if he truly existed as more than just a prophet, then he needed to show me. I needed proof, I needed confirmation, I needed something that would help me know for certain. I sat there on my bedroom floor in complete silence after speaking those words into the darkness. I was about to stand up and get back into bed when something shifted in the atmosphere of my room. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I almost missed it. The air felt different, thicker somehow, charged with something I could not name. Then that warmth I had felt at the wedding began to spread through my chest again, gentle but unmistakable. My breathing quickened. This was real. This was happening again. But this time, there was no music, no crowd of people singing, no church atmosphere to explain it away. I was alone in my bedroom in the middle of the night, and yet I felt that same overwhelming presence surrounding me. I cannot explain exactly how I knew, but in that moment I understood with absolute certainty that Jesus had heard me. He had answered my question not with words or visions or dramatic signs, but with his presence. I do not know how long I sat there on that floor. Time seemed to stop or become meaningless. All I knew was that I was not alone, that I had never truly been alone, that this presence had been waiting for me to simply ask, to simply open the door of my heart and let him in. The peace that filled me was beyond anything I had experienced through years of religious practice and prayer. It was not something I had earned or achieved through my own efforts. It was a gift, freely given, offered with a love that asked nothing in return except to be received. Eventually, the intensity of the presence began to fade, like the sun slowly setting rather than disappearing all at once. But the peace remained, settled deep inside me like a foundation that could not be shaken. I climbed back into my bed and lay there in the darkness, feeling completely different than I had felt just an hour before. I knew my life had just changed forever. Sleep came easily that night, the first truly restful sleep I had experienced in weeks. When I woke the next morning, the sunlight was streaming through my window, and birds were singing outside. Everything looked brighter somehow, more alive and full of color. I decided that I needed to learn more before making any decisions about what to do next. That afternoon at work, when Maria came into the shop to buy some thread, I gathered my courage and asked if we could talk sometime. She looked surprised but pleased, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe the following Saturday. That Saturday, I told my mother I was meeting a friend for lunch, which was technically true even if I left out important details. I arrived at the cafe early, my stomach churning with nervousness. When Maria walked in and spotted me at a corner table, her face lit up with a warm smile. She sat down across from me and asked how I was doing. I realized she had no idea what had happened to me at her wedding, that I had left in tears before the ceremony ended. I struggled to find the right words to begin. How do you tell someone that their wedding changed your entire life? That their God reached out and touched you in a way you cannot explain? Finally, I just started talking, telling her about the music, the overwhelming presence, the tears, and then about that night in my bedroom when I asked Jesus to show himself and he answered. Maria listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider as I spoke. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. She told me she understood how confusing and frightening this must be for me, especially coming from my background. Over the next several months, Maria became my secret teacher. We met every week or two at different locations around the city, always careful not to be seen by anyone who might know my family. I began reading the Bible in secret late at night after my family was asleep. One passage struck me particularly hard. It was where Jesus invited people to come to him if they were tired and carrying heavy burdens, promising to give them rest. I had been tired my whole life, tired of trying to be good enough, tired of the constant fear that I might not measure up, tired of performing religious duties without ever feeling truly close to God. And here was Jesus offering rest, offering peace, offering a relationship instead of just a religion. I read that passage over and over until I nearly memorized it. The more I learned, the more certain I became that this was the truth I had been searching for without knowing it. But with that certainty came a growing problem. I was living a double life. At home, I continued to be the dutiful Muslim daughter, wearing my hijab, going through the motions of prayer, attending family gatherings at the mosque. But inside, my heart was somewhere else entirely. I was falling in love with Jesus, getting to know him through his word, talking to him in my thoughts throughout the day. The disconnect between my outer life and inner life was becoming unbearable. Maria told me about baptism, about how it was an outward sign of the inward change that had happened in my heart. She explained that when Christians are baptized, they are publicly declaring their faith in Jesus, symbolizing their old life dying and a new life beginning. I wanted that. I wanted to make my faith official, to stop hiding what had become the most important thing in my life. But I knew that baptism would be the point of no return. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision about baptism. But then I would remember that presence I had felt, that overwhelming love and peace that Jesus had given me. I would think about how empty my life had been before, how I had gone through all the religious motions without ever really knowing God personally. I realized that what I had found in Jesus was worth more than anything I might lose. One evening, about 6 months after that wedding, I told Maria I was ready. My voice shook as I said the words, but I meant them with my whole heart. She arranged everything carefully. The baptism would take place at a small house church on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood where nobody knew me or my family. It would be early on a Sunday morning with only a few trusted people present. Maria warned me one more time about the seriousness of this step, making sure I understood what I was committing to. I nodded and told her I had counted the cost and made my choice. The night before my baptism, I barely slept. That Sunday morning, I told my mother I was going to visit my friend's city again. The lies were getting harder to tell, adding to the weight of guilt I carried. But I pushed those feelings aside and focused on what was about to happen. I took a bus to the address Maria had given me, getting off 3 stops early and walking the rest of the way to make sure nobody followed me. The house was simple and unremarkable from the outside, exactly the kind of place you would pass without a second glance. Inside, about 15 people were gathered in a small living room. They greeted me with warm smiles and gentle hugs, treating me like I was already part of their family even though most of them had never met me before. Maria introduced me to Pastor David, a kind-faced man with gray hair who would be performing the baptism. He sat with me for a few minutes, asking me questions about my faith, making sure I understood what I was about to do. I told him about the wedding, about the presence I had felt, about Jesus revealing himself to me in my bedroom, about the months of learning and growing in my new faith. Pastor David nodded thoughtfully as I spoke. Then he told me that what I was doing took great courage, that choosing to follow Jesus when it cost so much showed the genuineness of my faith. He reminded me that Jesus himself said following him would not be easy, that it would sometimes mean choosing him over family, over comfort, over safety. But he also promised that Jesus would never leave me, never abandon me, and that the life I was gaining was infinitely more valuable than anything I might lose. The baptism took place in a large plastic pool they had set up in the backyard, filled with water from a hose. It was not fancy or elaborate like the baptisms I had seen in pictures of big churches. But it was real and meaningful and sacred. I stepped into the cool water wearing a simple white dress they had provided. Pastor David stood beside me and asked me to declare my faith. I spoke clearly, my voice stronger than I expected, saying that I believed Jesus was the Son of God, that he died for my sins and rose again, and that I was surrendering my life completely to him. Then he placed one hand on my back and one hand over my heart, and he lowered me back into the water. For just a moment, everything was quiet and still, the water covering me completely. Then he lifted me back up, and I came up gasping and smiling, water streaming down my face mixing with tears of joy. The small group of believers around the pool clapped and praised God, welcoming me into the family of faith. Maria was crying too, so happy to see me take this step. The joy of my baptism lasted through that entire day. I felt clean, new, like I really had died to my old life and been raised to a completely new one. But as I rode the bus home that evening, reality began to settle back in. I was still living in my mother's house. I still had to face my family every day. And now I carried the secret of my baptism, knowing it would eventually come to light. For 2 months, I managed to keep everything hidden. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially in a tight-knit community like ours. One afternoon, my mother's friends saw me leaving the cafe where I had been meeting with Maria. She must have been watching us because a few days later, she told my mother she had seen me spending time with a known Christian woman. My mother confronted me that evening after dinner. Her face was serious as she asked me directly if I had been meeting with Christians. I could have lied. Part of me wanted to deny everything, to protect myself and avoid the confrontation I knew was coming. But I had made a commitment to follow Jesus, and that meant living in truth even when it was difficult. So I took a deep breath and told my mother yes, I had been meeting with a Christian friend. She asked why, and I told her I had been learning about Christianity. Her face went pale, and she sat down heavily on the sofa. What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. My mother demanded to know if I had converted, if I had left Islam. When I told her the truth, that I now believed in Jesus and had been baptized, she began to cry. Not quiet tears, but loud, wailing sobs that brought my sister running from her bedroom. My mother said I had broken her heart, that I had brought shame on our family, that I had betrayed everything our ancestors had believed for generations. My sister stared at me with a mixture of shock and anger. She called me selfish, said I had only thought about myself and not about how this would affect the rest of the family. The next few weeks were terrible. My mother stopped speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. My sister avoided me completely. Through it all, I held on to Jesus. When I felt most alone and afraid, I would go to my room and pray, and that peace would come again, reminding me that I had not made a mistake, that I had chosen truth over comfort, that Jesus was worth everything I had lost. Maria and my Christian friends supported me constantly, checking on me, praying for me, offering me a place to stay if things became too dangerous at home. Eventually, my mother gave me an ultimatum. Either I renounce my Christian faith and return to Islam, or I had to leave her house. She could not allow someone who had left Islam to continue living under her roof. It was tearing her apart to say it, I could see that. She loved me, but her faith and her standing in the community mattered more. She gave me 1 week to decide. I spent that week in prayer, asking Jesus for wisdom and strength. Part of me hoped for a miracle, that somehow my family would have a change of heart. But I also knew that following Jesus meant being willing to lose everything for him. On the last day of that week, I packed my few belongings into 2 bags. I took my clothes, my Bible, a few photographs, and the small amount of money I had saved from working at the textile shop. Maria had arranged for me to stay with an older Christian woman named Sarah who lived alone and had offered to take me in. That was 3 years ago now, and I want to tell you what has happened since then. My life did not become easy after I left my family's house. There were many hard days, many nights when I cried myself to sleep missing my mother and sister. I lost my job at the textile shop because the owner was a friend of my family and did not want to employ someone who had left Islam. But through all of it, Jesus never left me. He provided for me in ways I could not have imagined. The Christian community became my family, supporting me financially when I had no income, giving me a place to belong when I felt most alone. Sarah, the woman who took me in, treated me like the daughter she never had. She taught me more about faith, about trusting God even when circumstances look impossible, about finding joy in the middle of hardship. I found work eventually at a small business owned by another Christian, and slowly I rebuilt my life. About a year after I left home, my sister contacted me secretly. She wanted to meet just the 2 of us. I was nervous but hopeful as I went to meet her at a park far from our old neighborhood. She told me that watching me give up everything for my faith had made her think seriously about what I believed. She said she had never seen me as happy as I was now, even though I had lost so much. We talked for hours that day, and I shared with her everything Jesus had done in my life. I do not know yet if she will choose to follow Jesus herself, but at least she is asking questions, and I am praying for her every single day. My mother still will not see me or speak to me. That pain has not gone away, and I do not think it ever completely will. I miss her terribly, but I trust that God sees her heart and knows her struggles. I pray for her constantly, asking Jesus to reveal himself to her the way he revealed himself to me. I believe that nothing is impossible with God, and that one day I might see my mother come to know the love and peace that I have found. Now I want to speak directly to you, whoever you are listening or reading my testimony. Maybe you are like I was, going through the motions of religion but never really knowing God personally. Maybe you are searching for something real, something that will satisfy the deepest hunger in your soul. Maybe you have heard about Jesus but are not sure if he is truly who Christians say he is. Or maybe you already follow Jesus but are facing hard times and wondering if it is all worth it. Let me tell you with complete honesty and from the depth of my heart that Jesus is real. He is not just a historical figure or a religious teacher or a good example to follow. He is alive, he is present, and he wants a relationship with you. He sees you right where you are, knows everything about you, and loves you completely despite all your mistakes and failures. You do not have to earn his love through good behavior or religious performance. You just have to receive it, to open your heart and let him in. Following Jesus might cost you something. It cost me my family, my home, my security. For you, the cost might be different. It might be your reputation, your comfort, your plans for the future, your relationships. Jesus never promised that following him would be easy or comfortable. In fact, he promised the opposite. He said in this world we would have trouble and face difficulties. But he also promised that he would be with us always, that he would never leave us or abandon us, that he would give us peace and joy that does not depend on our circumstances.